I never thought I'd be the kind of woman to stand in the rain, clutching a letter that burned my soul to ashes. 44 years. That's how long I gave to Richard, my husband, the man I built a life with, brick by brick, through every sacrifice, every tear, every quiet moment of joy. We weren't perfect, God knows, no marriages, but I thought we were solid. I thought we were forever. Then, at 66, with my hair more silver than brown and my hands worn from decades of holding our family together, I found the note. It was tucked inside his jacket pocket, a careless mistake for a man so meticulous. I'm leaving, Evelyn. I'm marrying Tom. I'm sorry, Tom. His best friend since college. The man who'd been at our wedding, who'd shared our holidays, who'd laughed with us over countless dinners. My knees buckled, and I sank onto the kitchen floor, the linoleum cold against my palms. The world tilted, and I couldn't breathe. How do you process a betrayal that spans decades? How do you reconcile the man you loved with the stranger who'd been lying to you for God knows how long? I didn't cry. Not then. The tears would come later, but in that moment, something darker took root, a seed of fury, sharp and unyielding. I wasn't going to let Richard walk away unscathed. Not after everything. The house felt different that night, like it was holding its breath. Every creak of the floorboards, every tick of the grandfather clock, seemed to mock me. I sat at the dining table, the letter in front of me, its edges already curling from my grip. I read it again and again, each word a dagger. I'm sorry. Sorry. The audacity of it made my blood boil. Sorry doesn't erase 44 years of shared mornings, of raising our daughter, Claire, of weathering his mother's death, my father's illness, the lean years when we barely scraped by. Sorry doesn't undo the vows we made in that little church, with its peeling paint and stained glass windows, promising to love each other until death. I thought of Claire, now 38, living across the country with her own family. She didn't know yet. How could I tell her that her father, the man she adored, had shattered our world? I couldn't. Not yet. But I knew one thing. Richard wasn't going to get away with this. I wasn't going to be the pitiful wife left behind, fading into the background of his new life. I was going to make him feel the weight of what he'd done. The next morning, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The fog of shock had lifted, replaced by a plan. Revenge isn't a word I'd ever associated with myself. I was Evelyn Harper, the woman who baked pies for the church fundraiser, who remembered every neighbor's birthday, who kept our home running like a well-oiled machine. But that Evelyn was gone, buried under the rubble of Richard's betrayal. I started small, methodical. I went through his office, a room I rarely entered. His desk was a mess of papers, bills, receipts, and buried beneath a stack of old tax returns, a photo of him and Tom from a fishing trip last summer. They were laughing, arms slung around each other, the lake sparkling behind them. I stared at it, my stomach churning. How long had this been going on? Had I been blind, or had he been that good at hiding it? I didn't know which was worse. I kept digging, finding bank statements for an account I didn't recognize. Withdrawals, large ones, to a travel agency, a jeweler, a real estate company. He'd been planning this for months, maybe years. Each discovery fueled the fire in my chest, but I stayed calm. I had to. If I was going to do this, I needed to be smart. I called Claire that afternoon, keeping my voice steady. Your dad's gone on a trip, I lied. Just needed some time away. She asked if everything was okay, her voice tinged with worry. I told her it was fine, that I'd handle things. Hanging up felt like another betrayal, but I couldn't drag her into this yet. I needed time to unravel Richard's lies, to understand the scope of what he'd done. I spent the next few days playing detective, something I never imagined I'd be good at. I tracked down the travel agency from the bank statements. A young woman with a chipper voice confirmed a booking for a wedding in Hawaii, Richard and Tom's wedding. My heart pounded as she rattled off details. A beachfront ceremony, a reception for 50 guests, a honeymoon suite. I thanked her politely, my voice calm even as my hands shook. I found the jeweler next. 2 gold bands, custom ordered. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just kept moving, piecing together the life Richard had built behind my back. By the end of the week, I had a plan. It wasn't enough to confront him. A shouting match wouldn't satisfy the ache in my chest. I wanted him to feel what I felt, the humiliation, the loss, the rage. I started with the house. It was in my name, a gift from my parents when we married. Richard had never cared about the paperwork, always leaving those details to me. I called a lawyer, a sharp woman named Marjorie who'd been a friend since our kids were in school. I want to protect what's mine, I told her. She didn't ask questions, just got to work. We froze the joint accounts, redirected his mail, change the locks. Small moves, but they felt like reclaiming pieces of myself. I wasn't ready to face him yet, but I was building toward it. I wanted him to come home to a life he no longer recognized, just as he'd left me with one I couldn't comprehend. The hardest part was the waiting. Richard called a few times, leaving voicemails I didn't answer. "Evelyn, we need to talk," he said in one, his voice soft, almost pleading. I deleted it. I didn't want his apologies. I wanted him to squirm. I started reaching out to our friends, not to spill the truth not yet but to plant seeds. Richard's been distant, I'd say, my voice heavy with concern. "I'm worried about him." They'd nod, offer sympathy, promise to check in. I knew they'd talk, and soon the whispers would reach him. Let him wonder what I knew, what I was planning. Let him feel the walls closing in. I wasn't the Evelyn he'd left behind. I was something new, something dangerous. And I was just getting started. 2 weeks after I found the note, the phone rang late at night. I let it go to voicemail, knowing it was Richard. His voice cracked through the speaker, a mix of guilt and frustration. "Evelyn, please. I know you're angry, but we need to talk. I didn't want it to happen like this." I sat in the dark, the phone glowing on the table, and felt a strange calm. He thought he could control the narrative, that a few soft words would smooth things over. He didn't know me anymore. I'd spent those 2 weeks digging deeper, uncovering more of his secrets. The real estate company from the bank statements? A deposit on a condo in Hawaii, in his and Tom's names. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was financial, calculated. He'd been siphoning money from our savings, money we'd built together, to fund his new life. I felt like a fool, but more than that, I felt alive with purpose. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice. I started with the condo. I called Marjorie, who dug into the legalities. The purchase wasn't finalized, and since the funds came from our joint account, I had leverage. She filed a claim to freeze the transaction, citing fraud. It was a small victory, but it felt like drawing first blood. I imagined Richard's face when he got the call from the real estate agent, his dream crumbling. I didn't stop there. I went through our old photo albums, pulling out every picture of him and Tom. There were dozens barbecues, vacations, quiet moments in our backyard. Each one felt like a lie now, a mockery of the life I thought we had. I didn't destroy them. Instead, I mailed them to Tom's sister, Ellen, who'd always been kind to me. I included a note. "Did you know?" I didn't expect an answer, but I knew she'd confront Tom. Let them both squirm under the weight of their choices. The neighborhood was starting to buzz. My subtle comments to friends had taken root, and I heard whispers at the grocery store, saw curious glances at church. "Is Richard okay?" People asked, their eyes searching mine. I'd smile, say he was going through something, and leave it at that. The ambiguity was deliberate. I wanted Richard to feel the pressure, to know his perfect exit was unraveling. He called again, this time leaving a longer message. "Evelyn, I'm coming home. We need to sort this out. I don't want to hurt you more than I already have." Hurt me? He'd already torn my world apart. But his words gave me an idea. He wanted to come home? Fine. I'd make sure it was a homecoming he'd never forget. I spent the next few days preparing. I packed his clothes, his books, his precious vinyl records, and stacked the boxes in the garage. I didn't touch his office chair, though the one he loved, with its worn leather and creaky wheels. That I kept for myself. I sat in it, spinning slowly, planning my next move. I called the church and canceled his spot on the men's retreat he'd been looking forward to. "He's dealing with personal matters," I told the organizer, my voice steady. I reached out to his golf buddies, saying he'd be unavailable for a while. Piece by piece, I was erasing his presence from the life he thought he could return to. It wasn't enough to hurt him. I wanted him to feel invisible, like I had when I read that note. Claire called again, sensing something was wrong. "Mom, what's going on?" Dad's not answering his phone. I took a deep breath, weighing my words. "He's made some choices, sweetheart. I'll tell you soon, but I need you to trust me." She was quiet for a long time, then said, "I'm coming home." I didn't argue. Claire deserved to know the truth, but I wanted to face Richard first. I wanted him to see what he'd done to me, to us, before I let the rest of the family in. I wasn't protecting him, I was protecting my right to confront him on my terms. I started writing a letter, not to send, but to organize my thoughts. It was raw, angry, spilling over with everything I'd held back. "You took my life and made it a lie," I wrote. "But I'm taking it back." Writing it felt like sharpening a blade. When Richard finally showed up, it was a Friday evening, the sky heavy with rain. I heard his car in the driveway and stood by the window, watching him step out. He looked older, his shoulders hunched, his face lined with something I couldn't read: guilt, maybe, or fear. He knocked, and I let him wait. When I opened the door, his eyes met mine, and for a moment, I saw the man I'd loved for decades. But then I remembered the note, the condo, the rings, and the moment passed. "Evelyn," he started, but I held up a hand. "You don't get to talk yet," I said, my voice cold. I stepped aside, letting him in. The house was quiet, the air thick with tension. I'd rearranged the furniture, removed his favorite chair, hung new curtains. It was my space now, not ours. He noticed, his eyes darting around, and I saw the first flicker of unease. Good. Let him feel like a stranger in his own home. This was just the beginning. Richard stood in the living room, his hands shoved in his pockets, looking like a man who'd wandered into the wrong house. I let the silence stretch, heavy and deliberate, watching him shift his weight from one foot to the other. The rain battered the windows, a fitting soundtrack to the storm brewing between us. "Evelyn," he said finally, his voice low, "I know I hurt you. I didn't mean for it to happen this way." I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that made him flinch. "Didn't mean for what, Richard? For me to find out? For you to run off with Tom after 44 years? Or for you to drain our savings for your little fantasy?" His face paled, and I knew I'd hit a nerve. He hadn't expected me to know about the money. I stepped closer, my voice steady but laced with venom. "You thought you could just walk away, start over, and leave me to pick up the pieces? You thought wrong." He opened his mouth, but no words came. I didn't give him a chance to recover. I found the bank statements, Richard. The condo, the rings, the wedding in Hawaii. How long were you planning this? How long were you lying to my face? He looked down, his shoulders sagging, and for a moment, I thought he might cry. But I didn't want his tears. I wanted answers. "Since when?" I pressed. "Since last year? 5 years. Our whole marriage." He shook his head, his voice barely a whisper. "It wasn't like that, Evelyn. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want to lose you." Lose me? The irony burned. He'd already lost me, not when he left, but when he chose to live a lie. I turned away, my hands trembling, and pointed to the stack of boxes in the corner. "Your things are in the garage. You can take them when you leave." He didn't move. "Evelyn, please. Can we just talk? I owe you that." I spun around, my eyes blazing. "You owe me? You owe me 44 years, Richard. You owe me the truth. But you don't get to waltz back in here and act like a conversation fixes this." I saw the hurt in his eyes, but it didn't soften me. If anything, it made me angrier. He didn't get to play the victim. Not now. I walked to the kitchen, pulling out the letter I'd written, not the one he'd left, but mine, the one I'd poured my rage into. I didn't hand it to him. I just held it, a reminder of my resolve. "You're not staying here," I said. "This isn't your home anymore." He took a step toward me, and I held up a hand. "Don't. Just don't." The doorbell rang, cutting through the tension. It was Claire. I hadn't expected her so soon, but there she was, standing in the rain, her face a mix of worry and determination. She hugged me tightly, then saw her father and froze. "Dad." Her voice was small, like she was a child again, caught between us. Richard's face crumpled, and he started to speak, but I cut him off. "Claire, let's sit down." We moved to the dining room, Richard trailing behind like a ghost. I didn't want to do this with him here, but there was no avoiding it now. I told her everything: the note, the wedding, the money. Her eyes widened, then filled with tears. "Dad, how could you?" she whispered. He tried to explain, stumbling over words about love and truth and living authentically, but it sounded hollow. Claire shook her head, her voice breaking. "You didn't just leave Mom. You left me, too." The room felt suffocating, the air thick with pain. I wanted to comfort Claire, but I was too raw, too angry. Richard reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "I need time," she said, her voice firm despite the tears. She looked at me, and I saw something new in her eyes: strength, maybe, or resolve. "Mom, what are you going to do?" I didn't answer right away. I hadn't told her about the lawyer, the frozen accounts, the condo. I hadn't told her how far I was willing to go. "I'm handling it," I said, my voice calm but final. Richard's eyes met mine, and I saw a flicker of fear. He was starting to realize I wasn't the woman he'd left behind. I was something else now, someone who wouldn't let him off the hook. That night, after Claire went to bed and Richard left for a hotel, I sat alone in the dark, the letter still in my hand. I didn't need to read it again. Every word was burned into my mind. But holding it grounded me, reminded me why I was doing this. Revenge wasn't enough anymore. I wanted Richard to see the wreckage he'd caused, to feel it in his bones. I wanted him to beg for forgiveness, not because I'd give it, but because it would mean he understood the depth of his betrayal. I wasn't there yet, but I was close. I picked up the phone and called Marjorie. "What's next?" I asked. Her voice was steady, confident. "We hit him where it hurts most." I smiled for the first time in weeks. This was far from over. Marjorie's plan was ruthless, and I loved it. She'd found a way to tie up the condo deal indefinitely, citing discrepancies in the funding. Richard's dream of a new life with Tom was slipping through his fingers, and I hadn't even faced him again. But I wasn't done. I wanted him to feel the ground shift beneath him, just as it had for me. I started reaching out to more people, not just friends, but his colleagues, his old college buddies, anyone who'd known him and Tom. I didn't tell them everything, just enough to plant doubts. Richard's been secretive lately. I'd say, my voice tinged with concern. I hope he's okay. The rumors spread like wildfire, and I knew they'd reach him soon. Let him explain himself. Let him try to justify what he'd done. Claire stayed with me for a few days, her presence a comfort and a complication. She was angry, hurt, but she also wanted answers I couldn't give. "Why didn't I see it?" she asked one night, staring at an old family photo. I didn't have an answer. I'd been asking myself the same thing. We sat together, sifting through memories, trying to make sense of a life that now felt like a lie. She found a picture from her wedding, Richard walking her down the aisle, beaming with pride. "Was any of it real?" she whispered. I took her hand, my voice steady. "You were real. We were real. Don't let him take that from you." She nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. I hated him for that, for making her question her own past. I kept moving forward, my plan growing sharper with each passing day. I found an old email address Richard had used for work, one he thought I didn't know about. I guessed the password our anniversary, of all things, and found a treasure trove of messages between him and Tom. They weren't explicit, but they were intimate, full of plans and promises. "We'll start over," Tom wrote in one. "Just you and me." I printed them out, every single one, and filed them away. Evidence, Marjorie called it. Leverage. I didn't know how I'd use it yet, but it felt like holding a loaded gun. I also found emails from a lawyer, discussing a prenup for their marriage. The audacity of it made me laugh, a cold, hollow sound. They were planning a future while I was still living in the past. The next step was riskier. I contacted Tom's sister, Ellen, again. This time, I didn't send photos. I called her, my voice calm but firm. "Ellen, I need to know what you knew," I said. She was quiet for a long time, then admitted she'd suspected something for years, but never had proof. "I didn't want to believe it," she said. "I'm so sorry, Evelyn." I didn't want her apologies. I wanted her help. "Talk to Tom," I said. "Make him tell the truth." She hesitated, but I pressed. "He's not just hurting me, Ellen. He's hurting everyone who trusted them." She agreed, reluctantly, to confront her brother. I didn't know what would come of it, but I wanted Tom to feel the pressure, too. This wasn't just about Richard anymore. When Richard called again, I answered. His voice was desperate now, no longer soft or pleading. "Evelyn, what are you doing? The condo deal fell through. My friends are asking questions. What are you telling people?" I smiled, though he couldn't see it. "I'm telling the truth, Richard. Something you should have done." He tried to argue, but I cut him off. "You made your choice. Now live with it." I hung up, my heart pounding. For the first time, I felt in control. He was rattled, and I wasn't done. I started planning a public move, something that would hit him where it hurt most, his reputation. Richard had always prided himself on being the good guy, the reliable husband, the devoted father. I was going to strip that away. Claire helped, though I didn't tell her everything. She suggested a family gathering, not for reconciliation, but to lay everything bare. "He needs to face us," she said, her voice hard. I agreed. We invited close friends, a few relatives, people who'd known us for years. I didn't tell them why, just that it was important. The night before the gathering, I sat in Richard's old office, the emails spread out on the desk. I didn't know if I'd use them, but they were there, a reminder of what I was fighting for. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for Claire, for the life we'd built, for the truth. Richard thought he could rewrite our story. I was going to make sure he didn't get the last word. The gathering was set for Saturday evening, and the house buzzed with a nervous energy as I prepared. Claire helped me set the table, her hands steady but her eyes distant. We didn't talk much, but her presence was enough. I'd invited 10 people, old friends, a cousin, our pastor, people who'd been part of our life for decades. I didn't tell them the full story, just that we needed to discuss something important about Richard. The ambiguity was deliberate. I wanted them curious, on edge. I wanted Richard to walk into a room full of questions he couldn't answer. He'd agreed to come, though I could hear the reluctance in his voice when I called to invite him. "Evelyn, what is this?" he'd asked. You'll see. I'd replied, hanging up before he could argue. I wasn't playing his game anymore. This was mine. The guests arrived one by one, their faces a mix of concern and confusion. Our pastor, John, pulled me aside, his voice gentle. Evelyn, is everything okay? I smiled, though it felt brittle. It will be, I said. Claire greeted everyone, her charm masking the pain I knew she carried. When Richard arrived, the room went quiet. He stood in the doorway, his coat damp from the drizzle outside, his eyes scanning the faces. I saw the moment he realized this wasn't just a family meeting. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing, taking a seat at the far end of the table. I stood, my hand steady on the back of a chair, and began. Thank you all for coming. I know this is unusual, but there's something you need to know about Richard. His head snapped up, and I held his gaze, unflinching. I didn't read the note. I didn't need to. I told them the truth, plain and raw. Richard left me 2 weeks ago. He's marrying Tom, his best friend. He's been planning it for months, maybe years, using our savings to fund it. The room erupted in gasps, murmurs, shocked glances. Richard's face turned ashen, his hands gripping the table. Evelyn, don't do this, he said, his voice low, almost a growl. I ignored him. I trusted him for 44 years. We all did. But he chose to lie, to betray not just me, but Claire, our friends, our family. Claire's hand found mine under the table, squeezing tightly. I kept going, detailing the condo, the rings, the secret accounts. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The truth was loud enough. The pastor tried to mediate, his voice calm but strained. Richard, is this true? Richard didn't answer right away. He looked around the room, at the faces he'd known for years, and I saw the weight of their judgment settle on him. It's not that simple, he said finally, his voice breaking. I didn't want to hurt anyone. Our cousin, Linda, shook her head, her eyes wet. You didn't want to hurt anyone? Richard, you've torn your family apart. The room grew louder, voices overlapping, questions flying. I stayed quiet, letting it unfold. This was what I'd wanted for him to face the consequences, to see the damage he'd caused. Claire spoke up, her voice shaking but clear. Dad, you didn't just leave Mom. You left me. You left us all. Richard tried to explain, his words tumbling over each other. He talked about love, about being true to himself, but it fell flat. The room wasn't buying it. I saw the moment he broke, his shoulders slumping, his eyes darting to the door like he wanted to run. But he stayed, pinned by the weight of their stares. I didn't feel triumph, not exactly. It was something colder, sharper. Justice, maybe. When the guests left, their goodbyes subdued, Richard stayed behind. Evelyn, why? He asked, his voice raw. Why humiliate me like that? I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a stranger. You humiliated me first, I said. You don't get to choose how I respond. Claire and I cleaned up in silence, the house heavy with the aftermath. She hugged me before bed, her arms tight around me. I'm proud of you, Mom, she whispered. I didn't feel proud. I felt empty, but not defeated. There was more to do. The next morning, I got a call from Ellen, Tom's sister. She'd confronted Tom, and he'd admitted everything, years of feelings, secret meetings, plans to start over. He's a mess, she said. He didn't think it would come to this. I didn't care about Tom's feelings, but I filed the information away. Every piece of leverage mattered. I was building a case, not just for the lawyer, but for myself. I needed to know I could survive this, that I could rebuild, and I was starting to believe I could. The days after the gathering felt like the calm before a storm. The town was buzzing with whispers, and I could feel the shift in how people looked at Minute with pity, but with something closer to respect. I'd laid Richard's betrayal bare, and though it cost me pieces of my pride, it gave me power. I wasn't the broken wife anymore. I was the woman who'd stood up, who'd fought back. But I wasn't done. Richard's life was unraveling, and I was pulling the threads. Marjorie called with an update. The condo deal was officially dead, the funds tied up in legal limbo. He's got nothing to stand on, she said, her voice sharp with satisfaction. I thanked her, but my mind was already on the next move. I wanted Richard to come to me, to beg, to see the life he'd tried to steal from me restored. I started digging into Tom's life next. He wasn't blameless in this, and I wasn't going to let him hide behind Richard's shadow. I found his social media, sparse but telling. Photos of him and Richard at events I hadn't been invited to, captions about living your truth. The hypocrisy made my skin crawl. I sent anonymous messages to his colleagues, vague but pointed, hinting at financial misconduct. I didn't have proof, but I didn't need it. Doubt was enough. Let him scramble to explain himself. Let him feel the walls closing in, just as Richard had. I wasn't proud of it, but I wasn't ashamed either. They'd built their happiness on my pain. I was just balancing the scales. Claire noticed the change in me. "Mom, you're different," she said one morning over coffee. Her eyes were searching, worried but curious. "I'm not different," I said, stirring my cup. "I'm just awake." She didn't push, but I could tell she was grappling with her own anger, her own sense of loss. She'd started calling Richard, leaving voicemails he didn't answer. "He's avoiding me," she said, her voice tight. I wanted to shield her from that pain, but I couldn't. She needed to feel it, to process it, just as I did. But I also saw her strength, the way she held her head high, the way she helped me rearrange the house, claiming it as ours. We were rebuilding, together. Richard showed up unannounced a week later, his face drawn, his eyes red-rimmed. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. "Evelyn, we need to talk," he said, his voice hoarse. I let him in, but I didn't offer him a seat. He stood in the foyer, clutching a folder. "I'm sorry," he started, but I cut him off. "You keep saying that, but it doesn't mean anything. What do you want, Richard?" He held out the folder, his hands shaking. "I'm giving you everything. The savings, the investments, the car. I just want this to stop." I took the folder, flipping through it. Legal documents, signed, transferring assets back to me. It was a start, but it wasn't enough. "You think this fixes it?" I asked, my voice low. "You think money erases what you did?" He flinched, but I didn't stop. "You broke our family. You broke Claire's heart. You don't get to buy your way out." He sank onto the couch, his head in his hands. "I didn't want this, Evelyn. I love Tom, but I didn't want to lose you." His words were a punch, but I didn't flinch. "You don't get to have both," I said. "You made your choice." I saw the tears in his eyes, but they didn't move me. I'd cried enough for both of us. I told him to leave, and he did, his steps heavy, defeated. I sat with the folder, my heart racing. This was what I'd wanted him broken, begging, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like a step, not the end. I called Marjorie, updating her on the documents. "Good," she said. "Now we push harder." She suggested a public statement, something to cement Richard's accountability. I hesitated. It was one thing to confront him privately, another to drag him through the mud publicly. But then I thought of Claire, of the years he'd stolen, and I nodded. "Do it." The statement went out the next day, a carefully worded press release to the local paper. It didn't name Tom, but it didn't need to. After 44 years of marriage, Richard Harper has left his family for a new life, taking significant joint assets in the process. Evelyn Harper is pursuing legal action to protect her rights. It was clinical, factual, but it hit like a bomb. My phone rang nonstop, friends, neighbors, even strangers offering support. Richard called, his voice shaking with anger. "You've ruined me, Evelyn." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He'd ruined himself. I was just making sure the world knew it. The press release was a match dropped in dry grass. The town couldn't stop talking. Gossip swirled at the diner, the church, the grocery store. I didn't go out much, but when I did, I felt the eyes on me, some pitying, some admiring. I didn't care either way. I'd done what I needed to do, and Richard was feeling the consequences. He called again, his voice a mix of desperation and rage. "Evelyn, this has to stop. You're destroying my life." I let him talk, his words spilling out like a broken dam, but I didn't respond. When he paused, I said, "You destroyed mine first." I hung up, my hand steady, my heart cold. I wasn't sure when I'd become this person, but I didn't hate her. She was stronger than the Evelyn who'd trusted Richard blindly. Claire was struggling. She'd read the press release, and though she supported me, I could see the toll it took. "I just want to understand why," she said one night, her voice thick with unshed tears. We were in the kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd found the note, now filled with the scent of her baking cookies, an old habit from her childhood. I didn't have answers for her, but I listened, letting her pour out her confusion, her anger, her love for the father she'd lost. "He's still your dad," I said, though the words tasted bitter. "But he's not the man we thought he was." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "I'm staying here, Mom, until this is over." I didn't argue. Having her with me felt like an anchor, keeping me from drifting too far into the darkness of my own anger. Marjorie kept the pressure on. She'd filed a lawsuit for financial misconduct, citing the unauthorized withdrawals from our joint accounts. It wasn't just about the money. It was about holding Richard accountable, making him face the legal weight of his choices. She also suggested I sell the house. "It's yours," she said. "You could start fresh, somewhere new." The idea was tempting, but I wasn't ready to let go. This house was my history, my battleground. I'd fought for it, and I wasn't giving it up. Instead, I started redecorating, painting the walls, replacing Richard's old furniture with pieces I chose. Claire helped, her laughter filling the house as we argued over colors. It felt like healing, small but real. I got a call from Tom's sister, Ellen, a few days later. Her voice was shaky, apologetic. "Tom's leaving town," she said. "He can't handle the scrutiny." I wasn't surprised. The whispers I'd started had done their job, and Tom's reputation was crumbling alongside Richard's. "What about Richard?" I asked. She hesitated. "He's not doing well, Evelyn. He's lost." I didn't feel sympathy, but I felt something, a flicker of curiosity. Was he breaking? Was he close to the edge I'd wanted him to reach? I thanked her and hung up, my mind racing. I didn't want Tom's pain, I wanted Richard's. But knowing they were both unraveling was a kind of justice I hadn't expected. The next move came unexpectedly. A local reporter contacted me, wanting an interview. "People are talking, Evelyn," she said. "They want to hear your side." I hesitated. The press release had been calculated, controlled. An interview was riskier, more personal. But Claire encouraged me. "Tell your story, Mom. Don't let him control it." So I agreed. The interview was raw, emotional. I talked about our marriage, the betrayal, the strength it took to fight back. I didn't mention the emails or the anonymous messages, those were my secrets. But I laid out the truth of Richard's actions, letting the world see him for what he was. The article ran the next day, with a headline that cut like a knife. "Betrayed after 44 years, local woman fights for justice." Richard's name was everywhere now, tied to scandal, to shame. He showed up that night, unannounced again, his face haggard. "Evelyn, please," he said, his voice breaking. "I'll do anything. Just stop this." He was begging, just as I'd wanted, but it didn't feel like I'd imagined. There was no triumph, no satisfaction, just a hollow ache. "What do you want from me?" he asked, tears streaming down his face. I looked at him, the man I'd loved, the man who'd broken me, and felt the weight of 44 years. "I want you to feel what I felt," I said. "I want you to understand." He sank to his knees, sobbing, and for the first time, I saw the depth of his regret. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. I turned away, leaving him there, and closed the door. The storm wasn't over, but I was ready for whatever came next. Richard's breakdown in my foyer didn't change my course. I'd waited too long, fought too hard, to let his tears sway me. But it shifted something in me, a crack in the armor I'd built. I didn't want his pain to define me, but I wasn't ready to forgive, either. Claire saw it too. "You okay, Mom?" she asked the next morning, her eyes searching mine. I nodded, though I wasn't sure. "I'm getting there," I said. She didn't press, but her presence was a reminder that this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about her, about the family we'd been, about the future we could still have. I held on to that, letting it guide my next steps. Revenge had carried me this far, but I was starting to see something beyond its redemption. Maybe, not for Richard, but for myself. Marjorie called with news. The lawsuit was gaining traction. Richard's lawyer had reached out, proposing a settlement. "He wants this to go away," she said. "He's offering to return all the assets, plus compensation for emotional distress." I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "He thinks he can buy my silence." Marjorie's voice was steady. "He's desperate, Evelyn. We can push for more, or we can end it here. Your call." I thought about it, about the money, the house, the years I'd given. "Push," I said. I wasn't ready to let him off. Not yet. I wanted him to face the full weight of his choices, not just in court, but in his soul. The article had done its job. Richard's reputation was in tatters, his social circle shrinking by the day. I heard from mutual friends that he'd been asked to step down from his volunteer board at the community center. Conflict of interest, they'd called it, but I knew it was more. People didn't want to be associated with him. Tom, too, was gone, reportedly back to his hometown, leaving Richard alone. I didn't feel sorry for him, but I felt the shift. The balance of power was mine now, and I wasn't sure how much further I needed to go. I started visiting the church again, not for services, but for quiet moments in the pews. I wasn't praying, not exactly. I was searching, trying to understand what I wanted from this, what justice really meant. Claire suggested therapy, for both of us. Not to fix us, she said, but to figure out what's next. I resisted at first, stubborn as always, but she was persistent. We found a therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Ellis, who didn't push but listened. In our first session, I talked about the note, the betrayal, the anger that had fueled me. "What do you want now?" she asked, her voice gentle but firm. I didn't have an answer, not then. But the question stuck with me, burrowing into my thoughts. Did I want Richard's total destruction? Or did I want something else, peace, maybe, or closure? I wasn't sure, but I kept going to the sessions, letting the questions simmer. Richard reached out again, this time through a letter. Not an email, not a voicemail, but a handwritten note, delivered to the house. I almost burned it, but Claire stopped me. Read it, Mom. You don't have to respond, but read it. So I did. It was long, messy, full of apologies and explanations that didn't excuse anything. He wrote about his fear, his shame, his love for Tom, his love for me. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, he wrote, but I'm asking anyway. I folded the letter and put it away. I wasn't ready to answer, but I felt the weight of his words. They didn't soften me, but they made me think. What did forgiveness look like? Did it mean letting go, or just moving on? I met with Marjorie to discuss the lawsuit. She laid out the options: settle now, or take it to court. Court would be public, messy, final. A settlement would be quieter, but it might feel like letting him off. I thought about Claire, about the therapist's question, about the letter. I want him to face me, I said. In court, if that's what it takes. Marjorie nodded, her eyes sharp. Then we prepare. We spent the next week building the case, gathering evidence, the bank statements, the emails, the travel bookings. It was meticulous, exhausting, but it felt right. I wasn't just fighting for money. I was fighting for my truth, for the life I'd built, for the woman I was becoming. Richard had taken so much, but he couldn't take that. The courtroom loomed in my mind like a battlefield, but I wasn't afraid. I'd spent weeks preparing with Marjorie, going over every detail, every piece of evidence. The emails, the bank statements, the travel bookings. They painted a picture of a man who'd planned his betrayal with precision. But it wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about standing in front of Richard, in front of a judge, and saying, "This is what you did. This is who you are." Claire came with me, her hand in mine as we walked into the courthouse. She didn't say much, but her presence was enough. I felt her strength, her love, and it carried me through the doors. Richard was there, looking smaller than I remembered, his suit ill-fitting, his eyes avoiding mine. His lawyer, a nervous man with a thin mustache, tried to approach Marjorie, but she waved him off. "We're ready," she said, her voice like steel. The hearing began, and I took the stand, my voice steady as I recounted the betrayal. I didn't look at Richard, not at first. I spoke to the judge, to the room, to the truth. 44 years, I said, and he thought he could walk away without consequences. I laid out the financial deceit, the secret accounts, the condo. Marjorie presented the evidence, each document a nail in Richard's defense. His lawyer tried to argue that the money was his to spend, that our marriage was already broken. I laughed, a low, bitter sound that echoed in the quiet room. When Richard took the stand, he looked defeated, his voice barely above a whisper. He admitted to the withdrawals, to the plans with Tom, but he framed it as a search for happiness. "I didn't mean to hurt her," he said, his eyes finally meeting mine. "I just wanted to be free." Free. The word cut deeper than I expected. Free from what? From me? From Claire? From the life we'd built? I didn't react, but inside, I was raging. The judge asked him questions, probing his intentions, his secrecy. Richard stumbled, his answers weak, and I saw the moment he realized he'd lost. The judge didn't rule that day, but I could feel the tide turning. Marjorie squeezed my arm as we left, her smile grim. "We've got him," she said. Outside, Richard approached me, his face etched with desperation. "Evelyn, can we talk?" "Alone." Claire started to protest, but I nodded. 5 minutes, I said. We stepped into a quiet corner of the courthouse, and he looked at me, his eyes wet. "I'm sorry," he said, the words heavy, broken. "I know it's not enough, but I mean it. I never wanted to hurt you like this." I studied him, searching for the man I'd loved, but he was gone. "You didn't just hurt me," I said. "You hurt Claire. You hurt everyone who believed in you." He nodded, tears falling. "I know. I'll spend the rest of my life making it right, if you'll let me." I didn't answer. I couldn't. Not yet. Back home, Claire and I talked late into the night. She was angry, but she was also grieving. "I don't know how to forgive him," she said. "I don't know if I want to." I understood. Forgiveness wasn't a switch you could flip. It was a process, and we weren't there yet. But I felt something shifting in me, a softening, not for Richard, but for myself. I'd fought for justice, and I was winning. The lawsuit, the public shaming, the courtroom, it was all part of reclaiming my life. But I was starting to see that my life wasn't just about Richard anymore. It was about me, about Claire, about the future we could build. I went to therapy the next day, and Dr. Ellis asked again, "What do you want now?" This time, I had an answer. "I want to be free," I said, echoing Richard's words but meaning something different. Free from his shadow, from his lies, from the weight of 44 years. The judge's ruling came a week later. Richard was ordered to repay the full amount he'd taken, plus damages. The house, the savings, everything was mine. It was a victory, but it felt hollow. I didn't want his money. I wanted my life back. But I was starting to see that I could build a new one. Claire and I started planning a trip, just the two of us, somewhere warm, somewhere new. It wasn't about running away. It was about moving forward. Richard's begging hadn't healed me, but it had shown me something. I was stronger than he'd ever been. And that was enough for now. The ruling was final, but the aftermath lingered like smoke after a fire. I had the house, the money, the justice I'd fought for, but the victory didn't erase the ache. It wasn't about Richard anymore. It was about me, about finding a way to live with the pieces he'd left behind. Claire stayed for another week, and we spent our days talking, laughing, sometimes crying. We went through old photo albums, not to dwell on the past, but to reclaim it. "This is us," she said, pointing to a picture of her as a toddler. Me holding her, Richard in the background, smiling. "He doesn't get to take this away." I nodded, my throat tight. She was right. He'd broken so much, but he couldn't touch the love we'd built, the memories that were ours. I saw Richard one last time, a month after the ruling. He asked to meet at a coffee shop, neutral ground. I agreed, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to see it through. He looked older, his hair thinner, his eyes dulled by something heavier than regret. "I'm leaving town," he said, stirring his coffee without drinking it. "I can't stay here." I didn't ask where he was going. I didn't care. "I want you to know I'm sorry," he continued. "Not just for what I did, but for what I took from you." I listened, my face impassive. His words were sincere, but they were also too late. "I hope you find peace, Richard," I said, and I meant it, not for his sake, but for mine. I didn't need his pain anymore. I needed my own healing. Therapy with Dr. Ellis became a lifeline. She helped me unpack the anger, the betrayal, the guilt I hadn't realized I carried. "You're not just grieving the marriage," she said. "You're grieving the version of yourself you thought you were." She was right. I'd been Evelyn Harper, wife, mother, pillar of the community. Now I was something else, stronger, yes, but also raw, uncertain. I started writing again, not letters to Richard, but for myself. Stories, memories, fragments of the woman I was becoming. Claire read them, her eyes bright with pride. "You should publish these, Mom," she said. I laughed, but the idea took root. Maybe I would. Maybe I'd tell my story, not for revenge, but for redemption. The town moved on, as towns do. The whispers faded, replaced by new gossip. I sold the house, not because I wanted to run, but because I wanted a fresh start. Claire and I found a small cottage by the coast, with a garden I could tend, a porch where we could sit and watch the waves. It wasn't grand, but it was ours. We took that trip we'd planned, to a little island with white sand and turquoise water. We laughed until our sides hurt, swam until we were breathless, ate food we couldn't pronounce. It was the first time in months I felt light, like the weight of Richard's betrayal was finally lifting. I heard from Ellen a few months later. Richard was living alone, she said, working a quiet job in a new city. Tom hadn't stayed with him. I wasn't surprised, but I didn't feel the satisfaction I'd expected. Their failure wasn't my victory. My victory was in the mirror every morning, in the smile I could finally muster, in the way Claire and I rebuilt our bond. I kept going to therapy, kept writing, kept planting flowers in my new garden. I was learning to forgive not Richard, not yet, but myself. For trusting him, for not seeing the signs, for letting anger consume me. Forgiveness wasn't about erasing the past. It was about making room for the future. One evening, as the sun set over the ocean, Claire and I sat on the porch, sipping wine. "You did it, Mom," she said, her voice soft. "You took your life back." I looked at her, my strong, beautiful daughter, and felt tears prick my eyes. "We did it," I corrected. She smiled, and we clinked glasses, the sound sharp in the quiet night. Richard had begged for mercy, and maybe, in some small way, I'd given it not for him, but for me. I was free, not from the pain, but from its power over me. And that was enough. More than enough.